Afrofuturism, African American Literary Problem Solving, and Cadwell Turnbull's The Lesson. For my other Caribbean videos, I always use my nice Caribbean blue background. However, for this special presentation, I want to use this futuristic background because we will be talking about the genre and philosophy called Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism is a burgeoning genre in African American and Caribbean literatures. For this video, I'll be discussing the history of this genre. I'll also be offering some classic examples of it, and I'll explain some connections to contemporary literature. We will also look at Cadwell Turnbull's science fiction novel, The Lesson. The most popular example of Afrofuturism has to be the 2018 Marvel film Black Panther. This film shows the full potential of Black people across history and in the future. Most significantly, this film's science fiction and fantasy styles mirror Afrofuturism. Due to the success of this film, I do not think I need to elaborate too much on how Afrofuturism operates in it. This slide offers some basic definitions for Afrofuturism. In the top quote, Afrofuturism is defined as a literary and cultural treatment of the African diaspora through the conventions of science fiction, fantasy, and magical realism. In the bottom quote, I have listed some of the originators of this genre in African American literature. For our discussion of the lesson, I think the quote in the bottom applies really well. The intersection of race, technology, and power, especially colonial control, appear in the novel. We will return to this idea later in this presentation. I apologize for such a text-heavy slide. However, I really want to offer a discussion of this genre in a deeper way. In the first quote, it explains the history and development of the term Afrofuturism, which started in 1993. In the second quote, it elaborates on the original definition. In her fantastic book entitled Afrofuturism, The World of Black Sci-Fi and Fantasy Culture, Yatasha Womack explains how the genre offers a, quote, total re-envisioning of the past and speculation about the future rife with cultural critiques, end quote. What I appreciate about this quote is how the term encompasses identity in various ways. In the third quote, it explains that Afrofuturism also grounds its alternative reality in African history and myth across the diaspora. A wonderful example of this is Marlon James's Black Star trilogy. I would contend, as this presentation's subtitle indicates, that Afrofuturism has always been a vein running throughout the history of African American literature. To find this vein, we need to look for the possibilities literature offers to present, quote, a new future for Black peoples in America. In many ways, Afrofuturism allows us to see how writers and thinkers work through problems of racism and oppression in the United States' history. In my opinion, one of the first and finest examples of Afrofuturism is Henry Box Brown's slave narrative from 1849. As the slide above indicates, Brown decides to mail himself to a free state during the 1840s. This act is certainly thinking outside the box to solve his enslavement problem. I'm super excited to share this example. Martin R. Delaney's Blake is truly a revolutionary novel that imagines a multinational slave rebellion. This book also takes place in Cuba, which makes it a foundational text in Caribbean literature as well. Over the turn of the 21st century, this important lost work of African American literature has come back into print. Sutton Griggs imagines an independent Black nation within the state of Texas. In it, he makes the argument for a new future of Afrocentric identity that divorces itself from Jim Crow America in interesting ways. Some of the early 20th century examples of Afrofuturism are these titles. In Of One Blood from 1902 to 1903, Pauline Hopkins imagines a genetic link to a hidden African kingdom. It is considered one of the most essential readings to understand the trope of Ethiopianism in African American literature. Rudolph Fisher, when he published The Conjure Man Dies in 1932, takes on the trope of mysticism through this mystery novel. And Zora Hurston could be labeled an Afrofuturist with nearly all her works, for their visions of the future. Instead, I mention the two above as stellar examples. From 1938, Thelma Horse, one of her works of anthropology about the Caribbean, builds upon several myths and uses fabulous strategies to tell stories. Seraphim the Swanee, published in 1948, tells the story of a white Florida woman. I put the novel in this category because of Hurston's ability to write about white characters in the absence of black ones. Each of the titles above do not necessarily automatically register as Afrofuturist text. After all, each of these books are classic examples of African American modernism, in my opinion. However, each of the novels portray themes in Afrofuturism. James Weldon Johnson's The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, originally published in 1912, chronicles the narrator's internal negotiation with his biracial identity. The main character takes on a quote-unquote alien identity to examine both his black and white heritage during the height of segregation. Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, from 1952, eludes its title from H. G. Wells' The Invisible Man, a science fiction classic from 1897. Ellison, though, from the outset, warns the reader that the book is not about some science fiction work, like the famous one that preceded it. However, Ellison uses science fictional strategies during a famous chapter in this book. This chapter begins the protagonist's journey toward his epiphany and his rebirth as the Invisible Man. Finally, Toni Morrison, who I consider one of the greatest writers in American literary history, often writes novels that challenge conventions. Indeed, Song of Solomon from 1977 employs the myth of the flying Africans as an important part of the plot. Tar Baby from 1981 tells the story of a stowaway arriving on a Caribbean island. This alien invasion is often described through language of science fiction. The books above represent contemporary examples of Afrofuturism because each employs magical and mythic elements as essential to the story. I hope my brief reviews of these historical and contemporary examples will inspire you to explore more in African American literature. Before we turn to Turnbull's novel, I cannot ignore the role comics have played in shaping Afrofuturism. Comics live in the world of fantasy, science fiction, and myth. Moreover, with the endless possibilities available in the storylines, comics can present an alternate reality and an inspired future for Black peoples around the world. The three comics above, all from Marvel, introduce Black superheroes of Luke Cage and Black Panther. In this slide, I offer a preview of one important new writer in the comic space, Ezra Clayton Daniels. In his debut graphic novel, Upgrade Soul, Daniels depicts a couple that wants to develop and undergo a genetic rejuvenation experimental treatment. This book is a powerful and effective discussion on the possibilities and dangers of genetic mutation and chimeras in our super advanced technological age. I would highly recommend this work. This slide contains some recent, as of 2022, graphic novels that address various themes in Afrofuturism. I would highly recommend reading any of these titles. Of particular interest for Caribbean literature is Hard Ears, which uses myths and folktales from Barbados, as well as science fiction and fantasy to satirize colonization and post-colonial realities. As we turn our attention back to Cadwell Turnbull's The Lesson, I want to share some background information about the author. Turnbull is becoming a major figure in contemporary science fiction, with the publication of two highly celebrated novels as of 2022. Since he is a relatively new author, I'd recommend that you check out some of his published videos and interviews to find out more of his background and writing philosophy. The setting of The Lesson is the U.S. Virgin Islands, specifically the island of St. Thomas. The Ina hover their spaceship directly over Water Island. For more information about the history, demography, and culture of the U.S. Virgin Islands, please watch my video on Tiffany Unique's The Land of Love and Drowning on my YouTube channel. What I really love about this book is the way it presents various themes. Turnbull's style and organization make the novel easy to understand and follow. While the book contains several themes, I think one of the most important lessons, to pun the title, is the dangers of colonization. In the animation above, you can see the political change over the various territories in the Caribbean. Through his depictions of the Ina, Turnbull tries to make an allegory for the colonization of the Caribbean. This first contact of an alien race dramatically changes the Virgin Islands and the Virgin Islanders. The genius of Turnbull's novel is that he makes the Ina mostly harmless, well, for the vast majority of the time, and he makes them strangely human-like. The narrator describes them succinctly here. Quote, "The aliens weren't tentacled or slimy. They weren't green. They didn't have extra eyes shaped like long black ovals. They looked human. Perfectly human, in fact. But there was something off in how they stood and how they moved. Their movements were wooden, like steel images spliced together, and at other times, smooth and lightning quick, as if they were barely solid at all." End quote. The Ina appear to be uncanny reflections on our humanity, making the case that we share desires for power, control, and exploitation of lesser individuals and places. While I will not spoil the lesson that is learned in the novel, I think Turnbull's novel uses science fiction to make us reflect on our own culpability in our colonial histories, presents, and futures. Because of this rather extraordinary design and style, Turnbull's novel belongs as another significant work in Afrofuturism. As a way to conclude this discussion, I want to offer these two important messages. As the center quote indicates, Black people do have the ability to take control over their future images, especially when employing Afrofuturism. The side quote speaks to the true beauty of Blackness, no matter the universe. Here are some resources to learn more.